The silence of deep space had become Zara 9's only companion. Her ship, a modified freighter she had managed to steal during her hasty exile, drifted between the outer rim planets like a ghost haunting the edges of civilization. The vessel was too small for her massive frame, forcing her to duck through doorways and curl uncomfortably in the pilot's seat, but it was freedom, and freedom was something she had never truly known. 3 cycles had passed since the Valorian High Council had declared her genetically incompatible with their species' future. 3 cycles since she had been stripped of her birth name and given the designation 9, the 9th such aberration in their recorded history. The others, she had learned through whispered conversations and stolen data files, had all chosen the same path: voluntary termination, rather than face a lifetime of exile. Zara had chosen differently. Her crystalline skin caught the distant starlight streaming through the viewport, casting prismatic patterns across the cramped cockpit. The energy veins that ran beneath her translucent surface pulsed with a deep violet light, a color that her people considered both beautiful and dangerous. Too much power, they had said. Too much intensity for their delicate reproductive systems to handle. She would burn out any potential mate, destroy the careful genetic balance they had spent millennia perfecting. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Valorians prized strength, yet condemned her for possessing too much of it. They worshipped beauty, yet cast her out for being too radiant. They claimed to value uniqueness, yet demanded absolute conformity when it came to their most sacred act: the creation of new life. A soft chime from the communication array interrupted her brooding. Zara's massive hands, each finger ending in naturally formed crystal points that could cut through steel, danced across the controls with surprising delicacy. Years of living alone had taught her to be gentle with the fragile technology that kept her alive. The transmission was encoded in Galactic Standard, which meant it came from the inner systems where the major species conducted their business. Zara rarely received communications from the civilized worlds. Most species found her appearance disturbing, and those who didn't were usually bounty hunters, looking to collect the substantial reward the Valorian government had placed on her head for genetic theft, their term for her refusal to report for termination. Unknown Valorian vessel. This is Marcus Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I'm transmitting coordinates for a meeting. I have a proposition that might interest you. Zara stared at the message display, her large eyes, each one the size of a human fist and filled with swirling galaxies of light, narrowing in suspicion. Humans were the newest addition to the Galactic Council, barely 2 decades since they had achieved faster-than-light travel. They were considered a curiosity at best, an annoyance at worst. Their planet was small, their technology primitive, and their bodies laughably fragile compared to most galactic species. But they had one trait that had caught the attention of xenobiologists across the galaxy. They were the only known species that actively sought out and formed partnerships with beings completely unlike themselves. While other races formed alliances based on mutual benefit or similar evolutionary paths, humans seemed to possess an almost pathological need to understand and connect with anything they encountered. It was either admirable or insane, depending on who you asked. Zara played the message again, analyzing the vocal patterns. The human's voice was steady, confident, without the underlying fear or disgust she had grown accustomed to hearing from other species. There was something else there too. Genuine curiosity, perhaps even excitement. She checked the coordinates. The meeting point was a neutral space station in the Kepler Passage, a hub for independent traders and refugees from various conflicts. It was public enough to be relatively safe, remote enough to avoid unwanted attention from authorities. If this was a trap, it was an elaborate one. Zara had spent 3 years running from everyone and everything. 3 years of loneliness that had carved hollows in her spirit deeper than any physical wound. The smart thing would be to delete the message and continue drifting toward the galaxy's edge, where she could eventually find some uninhabited world to live out her days in solitude. But curiosity had always been her weakness. It was what had driven her to question the Council's decisions in the first place. What had led her to research the histories they had tried to hide, what had ultimately resulted in her exile, and now, faced with a mystery in the form of a message from the galaxy's most unpredictable species, she found she couldn't simply ignore it. Her fingers moved across the navigation controls, inputting the coordinates. The ship's aging hyperdrive whined in protest as it spun up, but after a few anxious moments, it stabilized. Zara settled back in her too-small seat and watched the stars elongate into lines of light as she jumped toward whatever awaited her. The Kepler station was a sprawling complex of interconnected modules that had grown organically over several decades. Originally built as a mining platform, it had evolved into a miniature city serving the needs of travelers who existed in the spaces between legitimate civilization. The docking bays were filled with ships of every conceivable design, sleek Altarian cruisers, bulky Goran haulers, and dozens of hybrid vessels cobbled together from parts of multiple species technologies. Zara's ship looked perfectly at home among the collection of misfits and refugees. She guided it into an empty berth and began the complicated process of shutting down systems that had been jury-rigged to work far beyond their intended specifications. Every piece of equipment on the ship told a story of adaptation, of making do with whatever she could scavenge or steal. The station's artificial gravity was set to accommodate a variety of species, which meant it felt slightly light to Zara's massive frame. She moved through the corridors with careful steps, acutely aware of how much space she occupied in passages designed for more typically sized beings. Other travelers gave her a wide berth, their eyes following her with mixtures of fear, awe, and occasionally poorly concealed desire. The meeting point was a cantina called The Drift, an establishment that catered to the station's more exotic clientele. The lighting was kept deliberately dim to accommodate species with sensitive eyes, and the atmosphere was thick with a dozen different types of breathing gases. Zara's crystalline nature meant she could process almost any atmospheric composition, one of the few advantages of her unique physiology. She spotted the human immediately. He sat alone at a corner table, and despite his species' reputation for fragility, he appeared completely at ease in the dangerous environment. He was smaller than she had expected, even for a human, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to navigate hostile situations through intelligence rather than strength. Marcus Chen looked up as she approached, and Zara braced herself for the usual reaction: fear, disgust, lustful fascination. She had seen them all countless times. Instead, the human's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine delight. "Zara... 9, he said, rising from his seat in a gesture of respect that caught her off guard. "Thank you for coming. Please sit. Though I suspect the furniture here wasn't designed with your impressive stature in mind." Zara carefully lowered herself into the reinforced chair across from him, her movements cautious and precise. The human was studying her, but not in the way others did. There was no fear in his gaze, no measurement of her worth based on how she deviated from some arbitrary standard. He was looking at her the way a scholar might examine a fascinating new discovery. "You know my designation," she said, her voice a rich harmonic that made nearby glasses vibrate slightly. "But I know nothing about you except that you are human. That alone makes this meeting unprecedented." Marcus smiled, and Zara was struck by how the expression transformed his entire face. Humans, she realized, were incredibly expressive creatures. Every emotion played across their features like weather patterns across a planet's surface. "I'm what you might call a cultural liaison," he explained. "My job is to identify opportunities for cooperation between humanity and other species. We're new to the galactic community, and we know we have a lot to learn. But we also believe we might have something unique to offer. And what does that have to do with me? I am no longer part of any community. I have nothing to offer anyone." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression growing serious. "That's where you're wrong. You have something incredibly valuable, something my people understand better than most. Which is the experience of being told you don't fit, that you're too different, that there's no place for you in the world as it exists." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. Humanity spent most of our history being told we were too small, too weak, too primitive to matter. We've learned that the things that make you different are often the things that make you strongest. Zara felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years: hope. It was a dangerous emotion, one that had led to nothing but pain in the past. But there was something in the human's voice, a conviction that spoke of personal understanding rather than empty platitudes. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Marcus reached into a small bag at his side and withdrew a data pad. "I'm offering you a job. And more than that, I'm offering you a chance to prove that everything your people believe about genetic compatibility is wrong." The data pad displayed star charts, genetic analysis reports, and what appeared to be the preliminary plans for some kind of research expedition. Zara's eyes widened as she processed the information. "This is impossible," she breathed. "That's what they said about humans joining the Galactic Council," Marcus replied with a grin. "We seem to specialize in impossible things. The question is, are you willing to help us prove it?" The datapad contained more than plans. It contained hope wrapped in scientific theory and backed by human determination. Zara read through the documents with growing amazement, her crystalline fingers tracing the lines of genetic models and evolutionary projections that painted a picture entirely different from everything she had been taught about her own biology.
The Compatibility Project, Marcus explained as she absorbed the information.
For the past 5 years, human scientists have been studying the reproductive barriers between different galactic species. We have discovered that many of the so-called genetic incompatibilities are actually based on outdated assumptions rather than biological reality. Zara looked up from the pad, her galaxy-filled eyes swirling with conflicting emotions. You're suggesting that my people exiled me based on theories that were never properly tested? I'm suggesting that your people exiled you because you represent something they fear: change, evolution. The possibility that their carefully controlled society might not be as perfect as they believe. Marcus gestured to the datapad. According to our research, your unique genetic markers aren't aberrations at all. They're adaptations. The word hit Zara like a physical blow. Adaptations. Not defects, not dangerous mutations, but evolutionary improvements that her people had been too blind or too frightened to recognize. She had spent years believing she was fundamentally broken, a mistake that nature had made and society had rightfully corrected. Adaptations for what, she asked, though part of her was afraid of the answer. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression growing thoughtful. That's what we want to find out. But our preliminary analysis suggests you're adapted for survival in high-energy environments. Your crystalline structure can process and channel forms of radiation that would be lethal to normal Valorians. Your size and strength would be advantages on high-gravity worlds. Your enhanced energy output might even allow for direct technological interface. You mean I could connect directly with computer systems? Among other things, yes. Zara, you're not too big to mate. You're too advanced for your current society to understand. And that's where humanity comes in. The human reached across the table and, to Zara's surprise, placed his small hand over one of her massive crystalline ones. The gesture should have been absurd. His hand was barely larger than one of her fingers, but somehow it felt more meaningful than any physical contact she had experienced in years. We want to offer you something your people never could, Marcus continued. A chance to discover what you're truly capable of. And in return, you help us understand how different species can work together despite apparent incompatibilities. Zara stared down at the small human hand resting on hers. His skin was warm, soft in a way that seemed impossibly fragile. Yet she could sense a strength there that had nothing to do with physical power. It was the strength of determination, of a species that had looked at a galaxy full of beings larger and more powerful than themselves, and had decided that size wasn't what mattered. There's more, Marcus said quietly. We've identified 17 other individuals from various species who have been exiled or ostracized for similar incompatibilities. We believe that bringing you all together might reveal patterns that no one has ever studied before. A colony of misfits, Zara said, though there was no bitterness in her voice. For the first time in years, the idea of being different didn't feel like a curse. A community of pioneers, Marcus corrected. The question is, are you willing to take the risk? Zara was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the information, but the profound shift in perspective it represented. Everything she had believed about herself, everything she had accepted about her place in the universe, was being challenged by this small, determined human who looked at her and saw potential instead of problems. What would this involve exactly? She asked finally. Marcus activated a holographic display above the datapad. The image showed a planet unlike any Zara had ever seen, a world of floating crystalline formations and energy storms that painted the sky in brilliant colors. This is Nexus Prime, a planet in the outer reaches that was discovered 3 months ago. It's uninhabitable by conventional standards. Too much ambient radiation, irregular gravity fields, atmospheric composition that would kill most known species within hours. But not me, Zara realized, her voice barely above a whisper. Not you. In fact, our analysis suggests that Nexus Prime might be perfectly suited to beings with their unique adaptations. We think it could serve as a base for our research and possibly something much more important. Such as... Marcus's expression grew serious. A new model for galactic civilization. One based on adaptation and cooperation rather than exclusion and conformity. The implications were staggering. Zara had never imagined that her exile might lead to something larger than mere survival. The idea that her differences, the very traits that had made her an outcast, could be the foundation for a new way of thinking about species interaction was almost too much to process. You would really do this? She asked. Risk your careers, your safety, everything, for beings that your own species barely knows? Marcus smiled again. That transformation of his features that spoke of joy and determination in equal measure. Zara, 3 generations ago, humans couldn't even agree on how to share one planet. We nearly destroyed ourselves over differences far smaller than the ones that separate galactic species. But we learned something important in the process. Diversity isn't a weakness to be overcome. It's a strength to be celebrated. And if you're wrong, if the research fails, if the colony doesn't work, if the Galactic Council decides that what you're doing is dangerous, then we'll have tried something worth trying, and we'll have given beings like you a chance to live as something other than exiles. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. But I don't think we're wrong. And I think you don't either. Zara looked around the cantina, taking in the diverse collection of species that had gathered in this forgotten corner of space. Most were here because they didn't fit anywhere else. Refugees, outcasts, criminals, and wanderers who existed in the spaces between legitimate society. She had become one of them without ever choosing to be. But Marcus was offering her something different. Not just acceptance, but purpose. Not just survival, but the chance to help create something new and important. How long do I have to decide? She asked. The expedition leaves in 2 weeks. But Zara... Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. I should tell you that this isn't just about scientific research. If we're successful, if we can prove that genetic compatibility is more flexible than anyone believed, it will change how the entire galaxy thinks about species interaction. There will be resistance. Powerful interests who profit from the current system will not want to see it changed. You're talking about making enemies of the Galactic Council itself. I'm talking about challenging assumptions that have shaped galactic civilization for millennia. Yes, there will be risks, but there will also be opportunities to help beings like yourself find their true place in the universe. Zara closed her eyes, feeling the energy flow through her crystalline structure as she processed the decision. When she opened them again, Marcus could see the swirling galaxies within them had settled into a pattern of calm determination. I've spent 3 years running from what I am, she said quietly. Perhaps it's time to start running toward what I could become. Marcus's smile was brilliant. Is that a yes? That's a yes. But I have conditions. Name them. First, I want to meet the other outcasts you've identified before I commit to working with them. Second, I want full access to all research data, not just the parts you think I need to know. And third, she paused, looking down at their joined hands. I want to understand why you're really doing this. What does humanity gain from helping beings that every other species has abandoned? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that spoke of personal experience. Because 50 years ago, my grandmother was told she was too different to fit into human society. She was what we call neurodivergent. Her brain worked differently than what was considered normal. She spent most of her life being told she was broken, that there was something wrong with the way she thought. What happened to her? She became one of the most brilliant engineers of her generation. Her different way of thinking allowed her to solve problems that conventional approaches couldn't touch. She designed the propulsion systems that got us to the stars. Marcus met Zara's eyes. She taught me that the things that make people different are often the things that make them extraordinary. I became a cultural liaison because I believe that lesson applies to more than just humans. Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with her internal energy systems. For the first time since her exile, she felt truly seen, not as a mistake or an aberration, but as someone with unique value and potential. Then I suppose we should begin, she said. When do I meet the others? Marcus's grin was infectious. How does tomorrow sound? I've arranged for them to gather on the station. Fair warning, though. You're going to be the tallest one in the group, but you're definitely not going to be the strangest. After 3 years of exile, strange sounds perfectly normal to me. As they rose from the table, Marcus keeping his hand in hers despite the dramatic size difference, Zara realized that for the first time in her life, she was walking towards something instead of away from it. The future stretched ahead of her, like an uncharted star system, full of unknown possibilities and potential discoveries, and she was no longer walking alone. The conference room Marcus had reserved was located in the station's diplomatic section, a neutral zone where beings from different species could meet without the usual territorial complications. Zara arrived early, her nerves manifesting as increased brightness in her crystalline veins, casting shifting patterns of light across the walls. She had faced countless dangers during her exile, but the prospect of meeting others like herself filled her with an anxiety she hadn't expected. The first to arrive was Keth Moore. and Zara understood immediately why Marcus had warned her about Strange. The being that entered the room appeared to be made entirely of what looked like living shadow, his form shifting and flowing as he moved. Only the 2 points of brilliant silver light that served as his eyes remained constant, floating in the dark mass that constituted his body. "Zara 9, he said, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The crystalline exile, your reputation precedes you." "I wasn't aware I had a reputation beyond being unwanted," Zara replied carefully. The Umbrals were a species she had heard of but never encountered. Beings of pure energy who had evolved beyond physical form. Kethmore's presence explained why he might be considered incompatible with his people. "Unwanted by those who lack imagination," Kethmore corrected. "I was cast out for maintaining physical density. My people have evolved beyond what they consider the primitive need for material form. They see my choice to remain corporeal as a devolution, a step backward in our species' development." Before Zara could respond, the door opened again to admit a being that defied easy categorization. At first glance, she appeared to be a standard aquarian, the aquatic species known for their graceful movements and iridescent scales. But as she moved closer, Zara could see that her scales weren't reflecting light in the usual patterns. Instead, they seemed to absorb it, creating areas of absolute darkness across her blue-green skin. "I'm Velnaya," the newcomer said, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her species but with an underlying harmonic that seemed to resonate in frequencies that shouldn't have been audible. "I absorb light instead of reflecting it. My people believe I'm cursed to steal the brightness from the world. And instead you've developed the ability to see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum," Marcus said as he entered the room, carrying a data pad and looking pleased. "Your curse allows you to perceive forms of energy that your people can't even imagine." The next arrival made Zara take an involuntary step backward. The creature that entered was massive even by her standards, a Thermalian who stood nearly 10 feet tall, and whose rocky, mineral-based skin glowed with internal heat that made the air shimmer around him. But where most Thermalians maintained the careful temperature control that allowed them to coexist with other species, this one radiated enough heat to make the room uncomfortably warm within seconds. "Brakthul," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "Too hot to touch. Too dangerous to be near. My people fear I will ignite the very air around me if I become emotional." "Your internal temperature runs 50 degrees higher than the Thermalian average," Marcus added, consulting his datapad. "What your people see as a dangerous malfunction, we see as an adaptation for extreme environment survival. You could live comfortably on planets that would cook other members of your species." The pattern was becoming clear to Zara. Each of the exiles represented an extreme version of their species' natural traits, not defects, but evolutionary pushes towards something new and potentially revolutionary. The realization was both exciting and terrifying. The fifth member of their group arrived in a rush of movement that made everyone else seem slow by comparison. Cheeks Nova appeared to be a standard stellian, a humanoid species known for their quick reflexes and agile movements. But where normal stellians moved with fluid grace, she moved with a speed that made her appear to flicker in and out of existence. "Sorry I'm late," she said, though she had actually arrived precisely on time. "I was trying to practice moving at normal speed. It's harder than you'd think when everything around you feels like it's moving through thick liquid." "Temporal displacement acceleration," Marcus explained. "You experience time differently than the rest of your species. What feels like hours to others feels like minutes to you, which made me impatient, reckless, and ultimately incompatible with stellian social structures," Cheeks Nova added with a rueful smile. "They said I was too fast to form meaningful connections with others." As the group settled around the conference table, Zara found herself studying each of her companions. They were all outcasts, all deemed incompatible with their own species. But Marcus was right. They weren't defects. They were variations. Evolutionary experiments that had been rejected before they could be properly understood. "There are 12 others who couldn't make it to this initial meeting," Marcus said, activating a holographic display that showed portraits and data summaries for each missing member. "But this group represents the core team for the Nexus Prime expedition." The hologram cycled through images of beings that looked like they had stepped out of mythology. A crystallian whose transparent body contained what appeared to be miniature stars, a vaporous whose gaseous form could apparently achieve solid density at will, and others whose variations from their species' norms were equally dramatic. "The question," Marcus continued, "is whether you're all willing to work together despite your differences. This isn't just about scientific research. You'll be building a community from scratch, on a world that may be hostile to most forms of life as we know it. Kethmore's shadow form shifted, the silver points of his eyes brightening. I have lived alone for 6 cycles. The prospect of solitude holds no appeal but the prospect of purpose. He paused. Tell us more about this world you've found. Marcus gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show Nexus Prime in stunning detail. The planet was unlike anything any of them had seen. Crystalline formations jutted from its surface like frozen lightning, and aurora-like energy storms painted the sky in colors that had no names. The data scrolling beside the image showed atmospheric readings that would be lethal to most known life forms. High levels of exotic radiation, Marcus explained. Gravity fields that shift without warning. Atmospheric composition that includes elements that shouldn't be stable under normal conditions. By conventional standards, it's completely uninhabitable. But not by our standards, Zara said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn. Each of our modifications would be advantages there. Exactly, Zara. Your crystalline structure could process the radiation safely. Brakthul, your enhanced thermal output would help regulate temperature in the extreme conditions. Velnaya, your ability to see across spectrums would allow you to navigate the energy storms. Kethmore, your density control would help you adapt to the gravity fluctuations. And Cheeksnova, your accelerated perception would let you react to rapid environmental changes. We're not misfits, Velnaya said, her voice filled with wonder. We're a specialized team. You're the first generation of something entirely new, Marcus confirmed. Beings adapted not for the worlds your species currently inhabit, but for worlds that haven't been discovered yet. Frontier colonists before there was a frontier to colonize. Brakthul leaned forward, his massive frame making the reinforced chair creak. And what does humanity gain from this? You speak of helping us, but what is your interest in creating this new community? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Honest answer? We gain knowledge. Understanding of how evolution works on a galactic scale, proof that genetic diversity is a strength rather than a problem to be managed. But there's more than that. He gestured to include all of them. Every species in the galaxy has individuals like you, beings who don't fit the standard template, who represent evolutionary possibilities that are being suppressed or eliminated. If we can prove that these variations are actually adaptations for unknown environments, we change how the entire galaxy thinks about genetic management. You're talking about revolution, Kethmore observed. Not just scientific revolution, but social upheaval on a galactic scale. I'm talking about evolution, Marcus corrected. Natural, progressive change that benefits everyone. But yes, that kind of change is always revolutionary to those who profit from maintaining the status quo. Cheeksnova had been moving restlessly during the conversation, her accelerated perception making stillness difficult. What about our people? What happens when they learn what we're doing? That depends on us, Zara said slowly. If we succeed, if we prove that our differences make us stronger rather than weaker, some of them might begin to question their assumptions. Others, she shrugged, her crystalline structure catching the light. Others will probably try to stop us. The Galactic Council has already expressed concern about the project, Marcus admitted. Not officially, but there have been informal inquiries about human activities in the outer reaches. They're worried about what they call genetic contamination, the possibility that our research might encourage other outcasts to reject their species' authority. Good, Brakthul rumbled. Let them worry. For too long they have decided who deserves to exist and who doesn't. Perhaps it's time someone challenged that authority. Velnia's dark scales rippled as she considered the implications.
We would be cutting ourselves off from everything we've ever known.
Once we take this step, there's no going back to our old lives. What old lives? Cheeksnova asked, her voice sharp with emotion. Lives spent hiding what we are? Lives spent pretending that we're broken instead of different? Lives spent alone because no one understands us? Her words resonated through the group. Each of them had experienced the isolation that came with being fundamentally incompatible with their own people. The loneliness of being surrounded by others yet utterly alone. The constant pressure to suppress their true nature in hopes of finding even temporary acceptance. Marcus, Zara said finally, you've shown us what we could become, but what happens if we fail? What happens if the planet kills us? Or if the research proves that we really are just genetic aberrations after all? Marcus met her gaze steadily. Then we'll have tried to build something better, and that attempt will matter regardless of the outcome. But I don't think we'll fail. Do you know why? Tell us. because you've all survived things that should have broken you. You've maintained your sense of self despite constant pressure to conform. You've kept hope alive despite being told repeatedly that there was no place for you in the universe. Those aren't the traits of genetic aberrations. Those are the traits of pioneers. The room fell quiet as each member of the group absorbed his words. Finally, Kath Moore's shadow form shifted into a more solid configuration. I believe I speak for all of us when I say that a life spent building something meaningful with others like ourselves sounds infinitely preferable to an eternity of exile. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Not just agreement to join the expedition, but commitment to something larger than any of them had ever imagined possible. They were no longer just outcasts running from rejection, they were explorers heading toward discovery. As the meeting drew to a close and departure plans began to take shape, Zara found herself standing next to Marcus as the others filed out. The human was shorter than her knee, but somehow his presence felt larger than her massive frame. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For seeing us as we could be instead of as we are." Marcus smiled up at her. "That's what humans do best. We look at impossible things and figure out how to make them possible. Besides, I think you'll find that you already are everything you could be. You just needed the right place to prove it." The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 weeks aboard a specially modified human exploration vessel. The ship had been redesigned to accommodate the unique needs of its diverse crew. Environmental controls that could handle Brackthul's heat output, lighting systems that wouldn't interfere with Velnia's enhanced vision, and motion dampness to help Chixnova adjust to what she called normal time. For Zara, it was the longest period she had spent in close proximity to others since her exile. The experience was both wonderful and overwhelming. After years of silence, the constant presence of voices, movement, and shared activities felt like sensory overload. But it was the good kind of overwhelming. The feeling of belonging somewhere, after believing she never would again. Marcus had insisted on coming with them, despite protests from the Human Diplomatic Corps. "This is the most important first contact mission in human history," he had argued. "We're not just meeting a new species, we're potentially discovering a new form of evolution. I'm not missing that." As they approached Nexus Prime, the ship's sensors began registering readings that defied conventional understanding. The planet's energy signature was unlike anything in the databases, and the preliminary scans showed geographical features that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. "It's beautiful," Velnia whispered from her position at the sensor station. Her unique vision allowed her to see energy patterns that were invisible to the others, and what she was describing painted a picture of a world that was alive in ways they had never imagined. "It's also completely uninhabitable by normal standards," reported the ship's artificial intelligence. "Radiation levels that would kill most known species within hours, gravity fluctuations that range from 1/2 to 3 times galactic standard, and atmospheric storms that generate electrical discharges powerful enough to disable most technology." "Sounds like home," Brackthul rumbled, his heat signature flaring with what might have been excitement. The first challenge came during the landing approach. The ship's conventional systems couldn't navigate the constantly shifting energy fields that surrounded the planet. Standard sensors became useless, GPS systems failed, and even basic communication equipment began to malfunction. "I can guide us down," Velnia offered, her dark scales rippling as she processed visual information across multiple spectrums. "I can see the safe paths through the energy storms. And I can adjust our approach speed to match the gravitational fluctuations." Chixnova added, her enhanced time perception allowing her to process the rapidly changing conditions faster than any computer could calculate. Working together, they accomplished what should have been impossible, a safe landing on a world that conventional wisdom said couldn't support any form of organized life. As they set down on a crystalline plain that stretched to the horizon, Zara felt something she had never experienced before. The sensation that she was exactly where she belonged. "Atmospheric analysis complete," the AI reported. "Breathable for humans with environmental suits, but the radiation levels are..." "Interesting." "Define interesting," Marcus said, though he was already suiting up for the first surface expedition. "The radiation doesn't appear to be harmful in the conventional sense. It's more like energy, nutrition. As if the planet is designed to feed certain types of life forms rather destroy them." Zara exchanged glances with the others. "Feed certain types of life forms" was a description that sounded remarkably like it applied to beings exactly like themselves. The first steps onto Nexus Prime's surface confirmed their hopes and exceeded their wildest expectations. As soon as Zara's crystalline feet touched the ground, her internal energy systems began to resonate with the planet's ambient field. Instead of feeling drained by the hostile environment, she felt more energized than she had in years. Brackthall's reaction was even more dramatic. The moment he removed his environmental suit, against all safety protocols but with Marcus's reluctant permission, his internal temperature stabilized at perfect levels for the first time in his life. The planet's extreme conditions weren't hostile to his enhanced thermal output. They were complementary to it. "This is impossible," Marcus breathed, his instruments registering readings that contradicted everything they thought they knew about planetary habitability. "You're not just surviving here, you're thriving." Velnia had wandered away from the landing site, her unique vision drawing her toward formations that appeared ordinary to everyone else, but blazed with hidden energy patterns visible only to her. "There's something here," she called back to the group. "Something that's been waiting." They found it 3 hours later, a structure that defied easy categorization. It appeared to be partially natural crystalline formation and partially constructed architecture, as if someone had grown a building rather than built it. The energy patterns that emanated from it created a harmony that resonated with each member of their group in different ways. "It's reacting to us," Kethmore observed, his shadow form shifting as he moved closer to the structure. "The energy patterns are changing in response to our presence." Marcus was frantically recording everything, his scientific excitement overriding his caution. "This is beyond first contact. This is like the planet was designed for you." "No. More than that, it's like it was waiting for you." As they explored the structure, they discovered chambers that seemed perfectly suited to each of their unique needs. A crystalline chamber that amplified and focused Zara's energy patterns. A thermal regulation chamber that allowed Brackthall to exist at his natural temperature without affecting others. A sensory enhancement chamber that expanded Velnia's already extraordinary perceptual abilities. "It's not just waiting for us," Zara realized as the pieces began to fall into place. "It's testing us. This entire planet is some kind of evaluation system. Kind of answers."
"Testing us for what?" Chix Nova asked, though her accelerated perception was already beginning to process possibilities faster than the others could follow. The answer came from an unexpected source. As they gathered in the structure's central chamber, the energy patterns around them began to coalesce into something resembling communication. Not words or symbols, but direct transmission of concepts and information that bypassed language entirely. The message was complex and overwhelming, but its essential meaning was clear. Nexus Prime was not a natural planet. It was a constructed world, created by an ancient civilization as a proving ground for beings who represented evolutionary advancement beyond their parent species. They had been waiting, for millennia, for the right candidates to arrive. "We're not the first," Velnia whispered, her enhanced vision allowing her to see traces of previous visitors embedded in the structure's energy patterns. "Others have been here before us, many others. But we might be the first to arrive at the right time," Marcus realized, his understanding growing as he processed the implications. "The first group with the right combination of abilities to activate whatever this place was designed to do." The structure responded to his words by revealing more of itself. Chambers opened that had been sealed, energy conduits activated that had lain dormant, and slowly, carefully, they began to understand what they had found. Nexus Prime was more than a testing ground. It was a graduation ceremony. The ancient civilization that had built it had faced the same challenges that now confronted the current galaxy. How to integrate beings who represented evolutionary advancement into societies that feared change. Their solution had been to create a place where such beings could discover their true potential and learn to work together despite their differences. But there was more. The planet wasn't just about personal development. It was about species development. The abilities that each of them possessed weren't just individual mutations. They were genetic keys, evolutionary advances that their parent species needed but hadn't recognized. The planet's systems were designed to help them understand not just what they could become, but how they could help their people become it too. Genetic catalysts. Marcus breathed as the full scope of the discovery became clear. "You're not outcasts, you're evolutionary ambassadors. The planet isn't just testing your abilities, it's teaching you how to guide your species' development." Zara felt the weight of the revelation settling over her like a new kind of gravity. For years, she had believed that her differences made her incompatible with Valorian society. Now she was learning that her differences might be essential to Valorian survival. "But our people cast us out," Brackthall pointed out. "They don't want to change. They fear what we represent." "Fear can be overcome," Kethmore said, his shadow form shifting into patterns that conveyed determination. "But first, we must become worthy of their trust. We must prove that evolution is not something to be feared.
but something to be embraced. The planets seemed to approve of their understanding. New chambers revealed themselves, each one containing knowledge and tools that had been waiting for beings exactly like themselves, training systems that could help them develop their abilities further. Communication technologies that could bridge the gap between their enhanced capabilities and normal species interaction. Most importantly, transportation systems that could take them back to their people when they were ready. How long? Chixnova asked, her accelerated perception already processing the vast amount of learning that lay ahead of them. How long before we're ready to go back? The planet's response was complex, but its meaning was clear. As long as it took. Some might be ready in months, others might need years. The timeline wasn't important. What mattered was that they each achieve full understanding of their role in their species' development. We're not just building a colony, Zara realized. We're building a school, a place where beings like us can learn to become bridges between what their species are and what they could become. Marcus nodded, his excitement barely contained. And when you're ready, you'll return to your people not as outcasts, but as teachers, guides to help them understand that evolution isn't something to be feared or controlled, but something to be celebrated and embraced. As they stood together in the ancient structure, surrounded by technologies and knowledge that had waited millennia for their arrival, each member of the group felt something they had never experienced before. The certainty that they were exactly where they belonged, doing exactly what they were meant to do. For the first time in their lives, being different wasn't a curse, it was a calling. The real work was just beginning, that they were no longer alone, and they were no longer without purpose. They were evolutionary ambassadors, genetic bridges between the present and the future, and they had found the place where they could learn to fulfill that destiny. Nexus Prime wasn't just their new home, it was their classroom, their training ground, and their preparation for the most important mission any of them would ever undertake. Returning to their people and helping them understand that the future of every species in the galaxy depended on embracing the very differences they had spent so long trying to eliminate. 2 years had passed since the first landing on Nexus Prime, and the world had transformed both the planet and its inhabitants in ways none of them could have predicted. What had begun as a colony of exiles had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, a training center for evolutionary ambassadors, a place where beings learned to bridge the gap between what their species were and what they could become. Zara stood at the peak of the Crystal Spire, the tallest formation on the planet, watching as the latest group of arrivals made their way through the adaptation protocols. Word of Nexus Prime had spread quietly through the underground networks that connected outcasts and exiles across the galaxy. They came in small groups, individuals who had been told they were too different, too dangerous, too incompatible with their own people to be allowed to remain. Each one had found their place on this impossible world. The planet itself had continued to reveal new secrets as more beings arrived. It seemed to adapt and grow to accommodate each new type of evolutionary advancement, creating new chambers and developing new training protocols that matched the unique needs of every arrival. What they had initially thought was an ancient testing facility had revealed itself to be something far more sophisticated, a living system designed to nurture and develop evolutionary potential across multiple species simultaneously. "It's time," Marcus said, approaching from behind her. The human had aged visibly during their time on Nexus Prime, the constant exposure to high-energy environments taking a toll on his unenhanced physiology. But his spirit remained as determined as ever, and his role as liaison between the enhanced and unenhanced had become crucial to their mission's success. Zara turned to face him, her crystalline structure now capable of energy manipulations that would have been considered impossible when she first arrived. The planet's training had unlocked potential she hadn't known she possessed, teaching her to channel and focus her abilities in ways that were both beautiful and practical. "The first return mission," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there 2 years ago. "Are we ready?" "You're ready," Marcus corrected. "The question is whether your people are ready for what you've become." It was a fair point. The transformation that each of them had undergone on Nexus Prime went far beyond simple skill development. They had become living examples of evolutionary potential, beings who embodied the future their species could achieve if they were willing to embrace change rather than fear it. But returning to their home worlds meant confronting societies that had already rejected them once, societies that might see their transformation as confirmation of their fears rather than proof of their potential. Zara's mission would be the first test of everything they had learned. The Valorian High Council had agreed to meet with her, not because they welcomed her return, but because the changes happening in the galaxy had forced them to reconsider their positions on genetic management. Reports of other species outcasts achieving remarkable developments had created pressure for them to reassess their own policies. The shuttle that would carry her home was a hybrid design, created using technologies from Nexus Prime combined with conventional galactic transportation systems. It could interface directly with her enhanced abilities, allowing her to pilot it through energy fields that would destroy normal vessels. More importantly, it served as a demonstration of what was possible when different approaches to technology and biology were combined rather than kept separate. "Remember," Marcus said as she prepared for departure, "you're not going back to convince them to accept you. You're going back to show them what they could become if they choose growth over fear." Kethmore materialized beside them, his shadow form now capable of incredible complexity and precision. He had been chosen to return to the Umbral Collective the following month, carrying with him proof that maintaining physical form didn't represent devolution, but rather a choice to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The others will be watching," he said, his voice carrying the weight of shared responsibility. "If your mission succeeds, it opens the path for all of us to return as teachers rather than exiles." Zara nodded, understanding the significance of what she was attempting. The past 2 years had shown them that their exile had been based on false assumptions about genetic compatibility and evolutionary development. By proving that to their home societies would require more than just demonstration, it would require them to become living examples of positive change. The journey to the Valorian home system took 4 days, giving Zara time to prepare for what would be either the vindication of everything they had learned on Nexus Prime, or confirmation that some societies were too afraid of change to accept even beneficial evolution. The Valorian response to her arrival was immediate and dramatic. Her ship was intercepted by 3 military vessels before she reached the outer system boundaries, and she found herself escorted to the capital world under what amounted to protective custody. The authorities weren't sure whether she represented a threat or an opportunity, but they were taking no chances. The High Council chamber had not changed during her exile. The same crystalline architecture, the same carefully controlled lighting, the same assembled figures who had condemned her 2 years earlier. But Zara herself had changed beyond recognition. Where once she had stood before them as a supplicant, hoping for acceptance despite her differences, she now entered as something entirely new, a bridge between their current limitations and their evolutionary potential. Her crystalline structure had developed new capabilities that allowed her to resonate with the chamber's architecture itself, creating harmony where once there had been discord. "Zara 9, the High Chancellor spoke, his voice carrying the formal disapproval that she remembered. "You returned to us, changed beyond recognition. Some would say you have proven our fears correct, that your genetic aberrations have led you down a path that takes you further from Valorian nature, rather than closer to it." "Honored Chancellor," Zara replied, her voice now capable of harmonics that resonated through every crystal in the chamber. "I return not as Zara, 9 the aberration you cast out, but as Zara Prime, the first of what our people could become."
The name change was significant.
On Nexus Prime, she had learned that the numerical designation given to outcasts was itself part of the problem. It defined them by their order of rejection rather than their potential for contribution. By claiming a new name that spoke of beginning rather than ending, she was asserting her role as evolutionary pioneer.
"Demonstrate!"
commanded Chancellor Veltar, the same official who had pronounced her exile. "Show us what your time among aliens has taught you." Zara smiled, an expression that now carried light as well as warmth. Instead of speaking, she extended her consciousness into the chamber's crystalline network, interfacing directly with the ancient systems that formed the heart of Valorian governance. What she did next would have been impossible for any normal Valorian, but it was natural for someone who had learned to work with crystalline matrices on Nexus Prime. She showed them the planet's memories. Through the chamber's crystal network, every member of the High Council experienced Nexus Prime as she had experienced it. They felt the harmony of beings working together despite their differences, saw the technologies that emerged when various evolutionary paths were combined rather than isolated, and understood the vast potential that lay dormant within their own people. More importantly, they experienced the loneliness and despair that drove beings to seek out Nexus Prime in the first place, the crushing isolation of being told that what made them unique also made them worthless. When the connection ended, the chamber was silent for long moments. Several council members were openly weeping, their crystalline tears creating prisms of light that added beauty to their sorrow. "We cast you out because we feared you would contaminate our genetic stability," Chancellor Veltar said finally. "But you return offering to enhance it. I return offering choice.
Zara corrected. The choice between remaining as we are or becoming what we could be. The choice between fearing our differences or celebrating them. The choice between isolation and connection. And if we choose connection, if we accept what you've learned and allow our people to explore these evolutionary possibilities, what then? Then our children will inherit a galaxy where being different is seen as a gift rather than a curse. Where every species works together to develop their full potential rather than suppressing it out of fear. Where the future belongs to all of us instead of just those who fit narrow definitions of acceptable. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days. Council members who had spent decades maintaining strict genetic controls found themselves reconsidering positions they had thought were unshakable. The evidence Zara presented, not just of her own transformation, but of what dozens of other species outcasts had achieved on Nexus Prime, forced them to confront the possibility that their approach to genetic management had been counterproductive. The decision, when it came, was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Valorian High Council voted to establish an exchange program with Nexus Prime, allowing their people to learn about evolutionary potential in a safe, controlled environment. More significantly, they officially pardoned all previous genetic exiles and invited them to return as honored teachers rather than condemned outcasts. You have given us a gift we didn't know we needed, Chancellor Veltar said during the final ceremony, the gift of hope that our people's future can be greater than our past. As Zara prepared to return to Nexus Prime with the first group of Valorian volunteers, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. 2 years ago, she had been deemed too big to mate, cast out as incompatible with her people's future. Now she was returning as an architect of that future, carrying with her the proof that love, whether for individuals or for entire species, was indeed the most powerful force in the cosmos. Marcus had been right about one thing. Humans did specialize in impossible things. But what she had learned on Nexus Prime was that every species was capable of impossible things when they chose growth over fear, connection over isolation, and love over rejection. The return journey to Nexus Prime carried not just Valorian volunteers, but representatives from 6 other species whose councils had voted to establish similar exchange programs. Word of the transformation was spreading throughout the galaxy, carried by beings who had once been outcasts and were now becoming the foundation of a new approach to interspecies cooperation. When Zara's ship landed back on the crystalline plains of Nexus Prime, she was greeted by Marcus and the others who had shared this incredible journey from exile to purpose. But she was also greeted by dozens of new arrivals, beings from species they had never encountered, individuals whose unique traits had brought them across the galaxy in search of the place where being different was not just accepted, but celebrated. How did it go? Marcus asked as they walked together toward the expanded complex that now served as both home and school for over 300 individuals from 47 different species.
It went perfectly, Zara replied.
Which is to say, it went exactly as it needed to go. Change is never easy, but it's always possible when you approach it with love instead of fear. As they reached the central plaza where beings of impossible variety worked, learned, and lived together in harmony, Marcus smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had helped prove that the galaxy's most fundamental assumptions about compatibility and difference were not just wrong but harmfully limiting. You know what the best part is? He said, watching as a group of youngsters from various species played together, their differences making their games more interesting rather than more difficult. What's that? 2 years ago you were deemed too big to mate. Now you're teaching entire species how to grow. Zara laughed, the sound carrying harmonics that made every crystal on the planet ring in sympathy. She had indeed been too big for the small world that had tried to contain her, but the universe, as it turned out, was exactly the right size for everything she had become. And somewhere in the galaxy, other beings who had been told they were too different, too strange, too incompatible to belong anywhere, were looking up at the stars and dreaming of a place where their differences would finally be welcomed. That place was waiting for them, built by beings who had transformed exile into purpose, rejection into acceptance, and solitude into the foundation of the most diverse and harmonious community the galaxy had ever known. The future belonged to all of them, and it was going to be magnificent.